Hey, everybody, this is Nevin, the host for the Patriotic Populist. Tonight, I'm going to be doing a solo live stream, another episode of Odds and Ends, actually, I should say, where I talk about different little research finds, whether it's historical documents, news articles, information that I've gotten from books. So today I'm going to talk about a couple of interesting articles and historical documents that I think have a relevance to today's current events. And first I'd like to start out with the outstanding national security analyst, J.R. Nyquist. When it comes to national security issues and foreign policy, and what to do to preserve our national security and how to conduct our foreign policy properly, J.R. Nyquist is the go-to person. And he wrote a massive, very well-researched article on his blog, jrnyquist.blog. In case you want to visit, I encourage you all to visit, read, and learn quite a bit about Russia and China and other foreign policy issues and problems. So he wrote a very well-researched piece dated April 15th, 2021, Are Russia and China Igniting a Third World War? And he lays out the case for the millionth time. He's been doing this since the 1990s. He's been writing about these issues since the late 1990s, first on WorldNet Daily and Newsmax, Sierra Times. He's written at least 2 books, one of which I definitely highly recommend. I recommend them all, but a really good book that kind of actually helped me change my views and attitudes on the right is The Origins of the Fourth World War. It's still available on Amazon.com. I highly recommend that you purchase a copy, or you can interlibrary loan it from your local library. So this article, it's really almost a research paper. He outlines meticulously on how China and Russia are preparing for war. This is a must read. You need to go and check out jrnyquist.blog. Excellently well-researched article. A plethora of information, of high-quality information. And there was a very important part. All of it was important, but there was a very interesting quote. Let me try and find it here. Okay, here we go. He quotes from the book by 2 Chinese PLA colonels, Qiao Liang and Wang Zhengshui, and they wrote Unrestricted Warfare. And they're both hardline communists, like all the officers in the PLA. It's Communist China, of course. And Nyquist wrote, or I should say he quotes the 2 PLA colonels in their book Unrestricted Warfare. And this is the quotes by the colonels. The era of strong and brave soldiers who are heroic defenders of the nation has already passed. In a world where even nuclear warfare will perhaps become obsolete military jargon, it is likely that a pasty-faced scholar wearing thick eyeglasses is better suited to be a modern soldier than as a strong young lowbrow with bulging biceps. The best evidence of this is perhaps the story that is circulating in Western military circles regarding a lieutenant who used a modem to bring a naval division to its knees. The contrast between today's soldiers and the soldiers of earlier generations is as plain to see as the contrast which we have already noted between modern weapons and their precursors. This is because modern soldiers have gone through the severe test of an uninterrupted technological explosion, and perhaps the salutary influence of the worldwide pop culture vs. rock and roll, discos, the World Cup, the NBA, and Hollywood. And of course, Nyquist writes, "This is a joke at our expense. The two Chinese colonels are laughing at us. They do not believe in the salutary influence of rock and roll. To read this Chinese text properly is to detect the mockery in it. These authors are soldiers. There can be no question that they believe in bravery and strength. Surely they do not seriously believe that nuclear warfare will perhaps become obsolete military jargon that will give way to a, quote, pasty-faced scholar wearing thick eyeglasses, enduring, quote, the severe tests of an uninterrupted technological explosion and the salutary influence of pop culture, rock and roll, the NBA, and Hollywood. Do you see their mockery?" These two Chinese colonels believe in the axe theory. It oozes from beneath their texts. They do not believe in the salutary influence of American pop culture except as something that prepares the way for a future Chinese surprise attack. In that sense, and only in that sense, it is salutary from a Chinese strategist's point of view. So they're mocking us. I agree with Nyquist. The China and Russia are mocking our consumer individualistic society that has been built, particularly starting in the 1980s onwards. President Ronald Reagan deregulated, the telecommunications industry. He loosened the restrictions on commercials being run in between children's cartoons during the afternoons that used to be banned. Really and truly, the consumerist obsession in this country really started placed on steroids under Reagan. And the communists see this as this hyper-consumerist orientation, which has been really brought and accelerated by the Reagan right and the successors to the Reagan era as a result of media deregulation starting in the 80s. This has weakened our society. This is another area where the free market right has, in the name of profits and so-called economic freedom, have actually weakened further the bonds that held together our national community and our local communities. It has put materialism as head of national strength and a cohesive sense of national morale. It has distracted us from the priorities of continuing to build an organic, healthy society. It has taken our eyes away from the looming threat of the Russians and the Chinese, especially in the alleged post-Cold War era. And of course, coming from elements of the Clinton-type Democrats was this notion that the Cold War was over and that Russia and China will continue to be trade partners, even expanded trade partners. So really and truly, this pop culture, rock and roll, discos, the World Cup, the NBA, Hollywood, the obsessions with celebrities that these two Chinese PLA colonels are mocking us for our weakness, well, a lot of that has been unleashed. This rampant consumerism has been unleashed by the free market right. And there's nothing wrong with us as a society liking nice things and, of course, having the commercials and corporations selling products and selling services. That's not an issue, but that has become the be end and all of society. Our culture is saturated with this. And our responsibility, of course, if the patriotic populist, or if we want to call it fourth positionism or radical civic nationalism, ever becomes the governing ideology, this is something that we're going to have to reverse, because one of the things we need to do, that a government needs to encourage, a future government to our liking, is to use at least the bully pulpit to spur a spiritual revolution in this country. And this spiritual revolution will balance things out. It will balance an appreciation and a continued need for the sale and production of consumer goods and services and nice things and nice products and nice material things. But on the other hand, it's also going to have to also underpin it and keep a lot of this materialistic impulses and put part of it back in the box. And this is going to require media re-regulation, again, de-Reaganizing the economy, similar to what I've talked about in different episodes of this program. So, but again, this essay that J.R. Nyquist wrote is a blockbuster essay, one of the many essays and papers that he's written about the threats of Russia and China and how they're preparing for war. And even though I've indicated some very strong disagreements to Mr. Nyquist personally over the phone, it's not like he's unaware of this, when it comes to national security, foreign policy, his knowledge of history, diplomatic, military, he is first rate. He is a national treasure in that respect. And we should always tip our hats to the likes of J.R. Nyquist for bringing excellent analysis of the global situation, the global threats. So I urge you to check out his article, its latest article available on jrnyquist.blog. Whether you agree or disagree with him, please keep the comments professional and respectful. So that's that article. The next item I want to talk about is this document from the Cold War International History Project website, courtesy of the Wilson Center. This is a document, formerly secret classified document dated May 16th, 1989. The excerpts from a conversation between Mikhail Gorbachev, the former General Secretary of the Soviet Communist Party until 1991, and Zhao Ziyang, who was a top Chinese Communist Party official. And this was during a period when the Soviets and Chinese were meeting to plan the summit and to heal their split. Now, some point I'm going to be doing a special on the Sino-Soviet split, because while there were disagreements between Beijing and Moscow from 1960 up until about 1989, there was a lot of collaboration behind the scenes between the two communist powers, even when they were exchanging sharp polemics and engaging in some border battles in 1969. There were a lot of collaboration and agreement and a lot of strategic trade between the two powers. And we're going to be going over that. There is even some evidence to hint that that split not only was exaggerated, especially by U.S. policymakers, but also could have been potentially a deception or even a false split. And we're going to be talking about that in a special episode of this program. But getting back to this document here, this was very, very interesting. So I wanted to get here. You know what? This was actually the wrong document. So let me just, my apologies for this. Okay, here we go. My apologies. But I had the right document, but turns out I did not. Oh dear. Okay. Sorry guys, a little embarrassing. I try to prepare for these things beforehand and I knew and thought that this would be the right article, so kind of bear with me just a moment. I wish I could give you some music here, so I'm just going to find it on my phone. Okay, so AXTAT. The name of this document, it is available on the Wilson Center's Cold War International History Project's digital archive. This document is Diary of Teimuraz Stepanov Mamaladze, dated February 3rd, 1989, and this is a Soviet bloc document that was classified. And this is a meeting between Soviet Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze and Chinese Communist Foreign Minister Qian Qishen. And one of the things that was interesting, they were preparing for the summit between Mikhail Gorbachev and Deng Xiaoping, both the Soviet and Chinese communist dictators at the time. And there was one thing that struck me as very interesting, almost like they were trying to hide the true purpose of this summit, which was a full-fledged Sino-Soviet alliance to challenge American power. But of course, they're not going to say that openly. They're not dumb, because otherwise that's going to upset the United States. And people are going to demand and be like, well, maybe the Soviets and the Chinese and the Soviets, they're split. Well, it healed up. And now, oh my God, where we're going to do two major powers ganging up against the United States. No, they're not going to say that openly, because that's going to get the United States on edge. It's going to cause other countries to reevaluate their relations with China, and potentially also cut off trade and technology exports. So I want to read this excerpt here, because I think this lets the cat out of the bag. So let us see here. Thank you all for your patience. Here. Oh dear. Mm-hmm. If you need to take a bathroom break or get a snack, do so. This is a good opportunity for that. My apologies. Okay, here we go. In this meeting, you had the Chinese hardline communist prime minister, actually, or premier Li Peng, who was actually trained in the Soviet Union back in the 1950s. The Soviet Union and China, this is what he said, have a common border, 7,000 kilometers. These are the biggest socialist countries whose economies can complement each other. In the normalization, so that already admits to an intention of developing an economic and technologically based alliance, which helps each other's industrial base, which means helps the military forces. In the normalization of relations, we must do without euphoria so that it does not cause concern on the part of other countries. Very important. In the normalization of relations, we must do without euphoria so that it does not cause concern on the part of other countries. It means we can't let the cat out of the bag. We can't say that, oh, the split is healed, we're allies, and we want to screw America. Euphoria means we don't want to be so cheerful and say that, imperialism suffered a defeat, because we don't want to alert other countries, meaning the United States, Japan, and NATO countries, and get them the heebie-jeebies and a little nervous. So there's an admission. Now, according to a defecting diplomat who served with the Vietnamese-installed puppet government in the People's Republic of Kampuchea, or Cambodia, he defected, I believe, in 1989, and he revealed that actually that the Soviets were telling the Vietnamese and their Kampuchean allies, Cambodian allies, to negotiate with the Khmer Rouge so that the Soviets can normalize relations with the Chinese in order to further isolate the United States. And this was told to the Cambodian diplomat by one of the Soviet Union's top diplomats. His last name was Kapitsa. So that alone shows that the intention of the Sino-Soviet rapprochement, the open rapprochement, and the summit between Deng Xiaoping and Gorbachev was to reestablish the alliance between Moscow and Beijing, and to ultimately create an anti-American alliance, despite what might be said publicly. And this document shows they don't want to create a euphoria, no fanfare. They didn't want to tip the United States off and worry the United States, Japan, and South Korea and other allies in Asia, as well as NATO allies. And in the different reports by the Chinese and the Soviets, and even the open transcripts of the summit between Deng Xiaoping and Gorbachev, there were calls for the creation of a new political order, that as a result of this summit, a new political world order would be created too. So again, lesson learned. Really and truly, our relationship with China, as we're going to learn, is a big mistake. It was predicated on a split that is best was exaggerated, and as we just have been discussing, a split that was healed by 1989 officially. The next item I want to talk about is this article from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. The title, it's dated from April 1st, 2016, authored by Carl Schreck, The Soviet Adventures of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was the entrepreneur who founded Apple Computer, creates, no question about it, great products. No question about it. Are they also a good corporate citizen? That's where it gets a little murkier. They use quasi-slave labor in communist China. They have a very close relationship with the communist Chinese. They certainly attempted to do business with the Soviet Union during the 1980s. And Steve Jobs himself has had some, let's say, questionable employer-employee practices too as well. A gentleman that I have really mixed emotions of, clearly creating great products, but that was largely also due to his workforce, employees, engineers, and managers below him, as well as also the vast contributions of Mr. Jobs himself. So this article I found very interesting. When Steve Jobs wanted to do business in the Soviet Union, he visited in the summer of 1985. And he met with a young commercial attaché at the U.S. Embassy. And there was also an older guy who was another attaché. His name was Mike Marin. And these two representatives of Apple Computer sat down with these commercial attachés at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow in the Soviet Union, summer of 1985. And they wanted to do business. And apparently they didn't recognize Steve Jobs physically. And according to Mike Marin, who is an embassy attaché, the visitors told them of their plan to open a manufacturing facility in the Soviet Union to produce Apple computers. Very much a high-tech product, computers. And that's something the Soviets needed and wanted. I mean, they certainly had a computer industry, but they wanted more and more of the Western technology to complement what they already had. And that would help not only their industrial base, but also their military forces. Marin warned the delegation from Apple, which included Steve Jobs, as well as Apple's general counsel, lawyer, said he warned them this would violate, quote, massive numbers of export regulations aimed at keeping sophisticated technology out of the hands of the United States Cold War enemy. This did not sit well with the younger man, meaning Steve Jobs. So, according to Mike Marin, quote, this tall, lanky guy, meaning Steve Jobs, stands up and starts yelling at me, "Who are you? You're just a bureaucrat. You don't know what you're doing." And the older man, Al Eisenstadt, who was the general counsel for Apple, stepped in to calm Steve Jobs down. Now, you might be thinking, oh, what's the big deal? Steve Jobs is a job creator. Got to kiss his ass. Got to be sycophantic to him. Well, here is Steve Jobs, who is doing a business with the enemies of the United States. The U.S. Embassy officials not only were upholding export control regulations and their importance, but also trying to protect this country's interests from more technology from falling into the hands of the Soviet Union. No less through a proposal to open a computer manufacturing facility in 1985, Soviet Union. Ladies and gentlemen, that exchange shows an incorrect imbalance in power relations between the US government officials and corporate capitalists. In a radical civic nationalist government, fourth positionism, patriotic populism, whatever you want to call it, this exchange would not be tolerated. People like Steve Jobs needs to know his place. People like him, our prevailing culture, our society should not encourage that kind of behavior. He needs to sit down, shut up, and follow orders and follow the law. People like Steve Jobs should have, yes, a wide freedom to produce the quality products and services. But they also need to understand that the state at times is powerful for them. And they can't talk to representatives of the state, especially when national security matters come into play. They can't be disrespectful to representatives and agents of the American state. This kind of exchange would not be tolerated. Because in a radical civic nationalist, we would tell them quite politely to sit down and shut up and you need to follow the law. Because we're not going to let you build that factory there. And you should not even be thinking about it. That is treason of the heart. You are aiding and abetting and increasing the legitimacy of the Soviet Union, which seeks to conquer Western Europe and even the United States and promote world global revolution, all four corners of the earth. Mr. Jobs' behavior is not acceptable. And it would never be acceptable in a radical civic nationalist state because that exchange exposes the power imbalance between corporate giants and the American government. They think that, quote, bureaucrats are their little peons, that they're beneath them. But in our new state culture, in our new United States, fourth positionism or radical civic nationalism, patriotic populism, that kind of exchange would not be tolerated. We would have a culture where agents of the state will be respected. Yes, they have to earn their respect from all classes of society to be true, but also they need to be respected as guardians of our nation's future, our security and prosperity. The last item I wanted to talk about is this paper that was written by Axel Berkowski of the University of Pavia in Italy. And the title is From Foes to Fair Weather, Friends and Comrades in Arms, the Ups and Downs of Relations between the GDR, East Germany, or Deutsche Demokratische Republik, or German Democratic Republic, and China in the 1980s. And there again was a very interesting little passage here, which shows that again, that different Soviet bloc countries during the 1980s, including the Soviet Union, were continuing to not only maintain, but even, expand relations with communist China in order to confront the West. Let's read this here. East Berlin, meaning East Germany, of course, denied having been exploited by Beijing and tricked into improving relations with it at the expense of relations with Moscow. I mean, remember, a lot of these Soviet bloc governments did not make policy decisions without the explicit approval of the Soviet Union. So there's a very good chance, in my opinion at least, that the Soviets gave kind of a wink and nod to these kinds of relations. Maybe they weren't 100% happy with it, but they certainly tolerated it, and they certainly didn't stop their allies, including East Germany, from not only maintaining ties with China, but even increasing them by the 1980s. In fact, East Germany claimed the very opposite was the case, offering its very own explanation of what the expansion of bilateral ties with Beijing stood for. And according to the East Germans, it was their expanded relations with Beijing was neutralizing China in order to later reintegrate China into what it dramatically referred to as, quote, the global anti-imperialist fight. In a letter to the CPSU Central Committee, the SED, meaning the Socialist Einheitspartei Deutschland, the Socialist Unity Party that was a ruling communist party in East Germany, in a letter to the Communist Party Soviet Union Central Committee, the SED, the ruling party of East Germany Central Committee, claimed that all instruments, trade and economic ties, scientific ties, cultural ties, and sports ties with China would be used towards such an end. Meanwhile, ties and cooperation, meaning such an end, meaning drawing together for the eventual, quote, global anti-imperialist fight. That's the, quote, end that they were trying to reach. Meanwhile, ties and cooperation strengthening Chinese military's capabilities, the document emphasized, would not be discussed or established. Well, of course, that officially got thrown in the garbage can because the East Germany and China by 1987-88, we're already having open military exchanges, and by 1989, the relations between the Stasi and the East German Army and the PLA of China actually increased and actually became somewhat more open. The SED Central Committee presented itself as very concerned that China's rapprochement with the U.S. would impose what it referred to as a two-front war with respect to the Warsaw Pact, creating an anti-socialist coalition consisting of the U.S., China, Western Europe, and Japan. East Berlin's claim that East reality, of course, was very different, and the fear of a, quote, two-front war with China fighting in the side of the U.S. was indeed completely nonsensical. East Germany's claim that the expansion of trade, scientific, and cultural ties to serve to neutralize Beijing and keep it from intensifying relations with the imperialists too as well. So now the article comments that that was implausible, but really wasn't implausible, because we have to understand the relations and the purpose of China's relations with the United States. The purpose of the relations between China and the United States was to gain the high technology and even weapons, which they did get from the United States under that great anti-communist president, Ronald Reagan, who did good things on the foreign policy front and also did a lot of things that were also not so good on the foreign policy front. China was still ultimately an anti-American nation. We're going to go over that when we have our special video on which takes another look at the Sino-Soviet split. And it's going to be a long video, but I think it's very, very important, very critical, because it's going to show that our relationship with China, starting in with Nixon and Kissinger's visits in the early 1970s, was actually a huge strategic mistake in the long run. But this shows, again, that the intentions of the East Germans to heighten relations with China were to consolidate a global front against the United States. And economic exchanges between East Germany and China that would serve to bolster particularly the military capabilities of China, because, of course, in order to do research and development for new weapons, you need technology, you need machinery, machine tools, components for chemical plants, and things of that nature, in order to create the proper infrastructure to create weapons. So even though they're not talking about explicit military cooperation, certainly having economic and industrial and trade and technology relations will serve to bolster the power of China. And China's technological base was developing, and certainly developing in the 1980s, and East Germany was definitely one of the more advanced industrial powers within the Soviet bloc and the socialist community at the time. So again, this shows that the Sino-Soviet split was killing, that it wasn't irrevocable, as a lot of American foreign policy makers were arguing at the time, including many within the Reagan administration. So that's another little piece of evidence that highlights my point and my contention that at best the Sino-Soviet split, even if it was real, was highly exaggerated, and it was also capable of being settled and healed, where both Moscow and its allies would become much friendlier with Beijing. So that concludes tonight's show. Sorry for the little pause in the discussion here, trying to find that document, Soviet-era document describing the summit preparations between Deng Xiaoping and Khrushchev, but we finally got to it. I look forward to doing another episode of the Populist Patriot. We're going to be doing another Popular Roundtable on Saturday, April 24th, where we're going to have a good friend of mine from high school, Rohit Chandra, who also is politically engaged, and he hosts a political Zoom group. Rohit knew me back in high school when I was a Reagan conservative with economically libertarian, free market fundamentalist leanings. So that should be an exciting discussion. Can't wait to have it. Anyways, everyone, enjoy your weekend. Stay safe and have a pleasant and productive day at work starting tomorrow. Take care and God bless.